Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a live edition of the Legal Score. I'm your host, Sonja. Hope everyone is doing great today on this May 16th, 2026. I'm going to give a shout out to the class of 98 from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, my alma mater, on this day, on this date, on this exact day and date, back in 1998. We were graduating with our Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science, what have you. But anyway, welcome to the Legal Score. All opinions expressed here are my personal opinions and not solicitation of providing legal advice. Hope everybody's doing great. This is the show where I come on and basically talk about current events, talk about things going on in our community and subjects of interest, as well as legal related information. I want to give a shout out to Brian B.A. Strilla, the production team behind this show. The McGrath Podcast Network, shout out to Miss Linda. All shows this month dedicated to Mac, our great producer in the sky, and Pink Fanfur for all the promos. All right, y'all, we're talking about crime courts and the Constitution today. This is really, really big. It's going to be diving into some of the biggest criminal justice stories dominating the national conversations this week, especially those cases that are being televised on Law and Crime Network. Shout out to them. And also Court TV. Today's topics are going to be the Julio Fulio murder trial, the growing national debate over racial gerrymandering and redistricting that's been huge this week, as well as the shocking Knox County Sheriff Department arrest out in Knoxville, Tennessee, where 11 sheriff deputies were detained by FBI agents. And we'll get into all of that here shortly. But at the end, we're going to, of course, wind up. May is Mental Health Month. It's also Military Appreciation Month. Thank you so much to all of the soldiers out there that are still with us that served, and definitely Memorial Day, honoring those that gave all. A lot going on in the month of May. We'll close out with a mental health note regarding that. This is the first segment. Feel free to say hello, come in, chat, let me know your opinions, let me know where you're watching from. Would love to engage with you. Other than that, let's start. The first thing is the Julio Fulio murder trial. I know you guys think that's a tongue twister. It is not. He is a rapper out of the Florida area. This case has absolutely taken over true crime, YouTube, and social media this week. This is connected to Julio Fulio, who is out of Jacksonville, Florida. Real name Charles Jones Jr. He was a Jacksonville rapper heavily associated with the city's long-running gang and rap feuds, drill rap, in fact. You guys probably are familiar with that from the YSL case that was televised for months and months and months on end. His music career actually became infamous because so much of it centered around actual violence, retaliation, and dead rivals. Now, unlike a lot of rap beefs that you and I are probably used to from the 80s and the 90s, well, let's be clear, the Biggie and Pac rap feud got really violent quick. But this new era beef is a whole new level. A lot of the rap beefs sometimes stay online, but however, this one repeatedly crossed into real world shootings and homicides. Disclaimer, this is going to have a lot of probably triggering language in it, so viewer discretion is advised. Unlike a lot of those type of battles that we've seen, like, just little hit or miss or whatever, Fulio built a major following online because of his aggressive diss tracks and social media tauntings directed at rival gangs in the Jacksonville area. By 2024, law enforcement had been monitoring multiple groups connected to these rivalries. Then came June 23rd, 2024. Fulio was in Tampa celebrating his birthday, literally like having these events, lined up. He was live streaming. He was telling everybody, hey, this is where I am. I'm celebrating. Come pull up. Come celebrate with me. According to prosecutors, he originally planned to stay at one hotel, but those reservations actually fell through. And therefore, and it fell through, let's be specific. His reservation fell through because once the hotel realized the amount of people that were going to be there and the type of people that were going to be there with rappers, and they were familiar with this type of online violence, they removed the reservation. So that meant that this gathering was too large and it was going to be disruptive to other guests in the hotel. And there were safety concerns. Let's be clear about that. He then relocated to another hotel not far from there, this time in the university area in Tampa, to continue to celebrate his birthday. Investigators say that the defendants in this case tracked his movements throughout the night. They have video. This is the day and age. Everybody has a Ring camera. Everybody has some type of meta AI or what have you, that everybody's actions are being recorded. And I've always been told since any of the state, shout out to Will Smith, that there's always Big Brother in the sky. So this was all very well documented, very well orchestrated and laid out case. This was not a situation that it was just impromptu. This was done with cold, calculated planning. They've actually got surveillance from hotel surveillance, digital tracking. These are the types of maneuvers and devices that the defendants in this case use to track Charles Jones Jr. down, to unalive him, to murder him while he was celebrating his birthday. Hotel surveillance, transportation, digital tracking, communication through their phones, of course, and social media, and eventually the ambush shooting itself. The state says that Fulio was cornered in a hotel parking lot and shot multiple times, and he was. I watched this video and it was unbelievable. This guy, Fulio was a sitting duck. There was no way of escape. And even the driver of that vehicle during the ambush itself, he attempted to flee. It's a miracle that the driver survived. He attempted to flee, and the car literally in his fleeing ran into another ambush of fire because there were other defendants waiting to continue this attempted massacre. And in fact, they testified that Fulio was attempting to climb into the back seat to avoid a direct hit, but they had machine style weapons. They had modified weapons, these ARs and whatnot, which is automatic rifles. They even found a 9mm, which had been modified. And this case actually spilled over into Georgia, as one of the defendants escaped and was found in the Gwinnett County area, which is outside of Atlanta. But this is crazy because with Flock, everybody should know, Flock is the highway tracking device, the cameras that you don't really necessarily see. They read tags all the time. And that's how offenders are tracked from state to state, because all they need to do is pick up that specific tag that is tied to that surveillance, that is tied to that ambush. The state says that Fulio was actually cornered, sitting in the vehicle. 3 other people were also injured in the attack. One was a female who was also in the vehicle and was attempting to get out during that time. Now, here's why this case has actually become such a massive online phenomenon. The prosecutor's case is built heavily around Instagram activity, text messaging, location tracking, gang affiliations, online taunts and threats, and digital evidence. Now, in a day that we are heavily relying on AI, relying on things on the internet, digital imprints are everywhere. Some people stupidly, or should I say ignorantly, think that anything you don't write down, that you put in your notes on your phone or what have you, that's under supposedly lock and key, because you have to do face identification or fingerprint identification. There's been a lot of controversy around that, especially with Apple. No disclaimer to these companies I'm mentioning. But Apple, in fact, during an ambush in California years ago, they wanted to get permission to seek to unlock this phone for one of the defendants who had killed these people. And then they themselves were also lost their life in the situation. And Apple was just like, no, that's privacy. So that's something we'll talk about, a little bit later on as we go on. But jurors have reportedly been shown Instagram posts, direct messages, travel records, Airbnb bookings, and communication allegedly linking the defendants all together at different times. This is according to Court TV. And so one major figure in this trial is Alicia Andrews. She is the young lady that was supposedly the lookout and helped coordinate the defendants' movements before the shooting. She's the girlfriend of Mr. Gaither. I'll talk about him in just a moment. And I really my heart actually went out to her because this is a situation that young women, and I'm sure to some degree, maybe it's men as well, but you often see young women get entranced and snatched up into these crimes because of the person that they are dating. It's not something they just went out one day and decided we're going to do X, Y, Z. And I know a lot of you all will be like, well, listen, they're adults. They had free will. She had free will. But sometimes you just don't necessarily know the backstory. But she was their lookout, helped coordinate the defendant's movements before the shooting. In fact, there was video surveillance of her talking on the phone. And in fact, she was only tied in when one of the other defendants was unreachable to be advised of where Mr. Jones was going to be. And in that lack of communication, she sent a text to basically tell him to respond to her text or pick up the phone or something to that effect. According to testimony discussed during trial coverage, and Alicia Andrews' trial was a few months ago. I watched that as well. So her trial, she severed her case from the other defendants. She allegedly booked lodging, communicated with participants, and assisted in tracking Fulio's whereabouts. Now, let me let you all know this. In the state of Florida, because their prosecutor did a great job of explaining Floridian law when it comes to criminal offenses. When it comes to offenses where a person is shot or injured or robbed or what have you, in Florida, you do not have to be the person pulling the trigger. You do not have to even be present when the event transpires. You just have to be tied to it as have had significant and substantial knowledge that this event was going to occur, which could be like an opening, so to speak, because if you are telling a juror, which is a lay person, you and I, about these movements, then it makes them have a subjective type viewpoint as to what actually occurred and not objective. And in criminal justice and law as a whole, you're supposed to be objective in any given opinions. Let me just make sure I don't have any comments coming on because sometimes I don't see those. All right. So anyway, moving back to that, I'll talk about her trial a little bit, but they are using her testimony from that trial to basically corroborate what they already know to believe based on the evidence presented from this trial. Now, Alicia Andrews does have an appeal that is out there. Everyone that is convicted of a crime does have a certain time that they can appeal a guilty verdict from a trial court. So there you have it. But the prosecution's theory is essentially that this was not spontaneous. Like I told you all earlier, this was very calculated. This was a planned retaliatory ambush. Fulio had been rapping about some of their, quote, ATK affiliations with rival gang factions in the Jacksonville area. They introduced gang-related testimony about that. Even Youngin Ace, all you all who don't necessarily know who he is, he's tied up in this too, but not as a defendant, but as one of these drill rappers who has put this music out there celebrating the demise of their, quote, ops, which is their opponent, the opposite of what they would be in another gang. Some of these videos are very disturbing, going to the person's grave, making mockery of it during the rap, basically saying what happened. And it's some of their affiliates that did the killing. So let's talk about the trial strategy that is going to be important in this. The prosecution has leaned hard into digital footprints. I told you guys about that a little bit ago, about how everything is electronic, nothing is written anymore. Honestly, this reflects the future of criminal trials in America. We talk about AI, we talk about, how unfortunately sometimes AI can create things that are not true and create scenarios where people have no idea that they were supposed to have been there. Well, they're saying that could occur. However, in this specific case, modern murder prosecutions increasingly involve cell tower data, Instagram stories, even those stories that you guys think are disappearing, they are not. Encrypted messages, that's a moot issue because with a subpoena, everything is exposed. GPS data, cloud storage, yes, and social media posts. Let's talk about this cell tower data for a little bit. Now, the cell tower data is interesting to me because it was pointed out in great detail in the YSL case by the prosecution When I tell you they had it tied up, they had phone calls throughout this country, not just in one state or near the area of the crime. They could pinpoint where calls were coming from to that phone, no matter where they were. And so, if there's a cell tower data, it doesn't matter if you got a burner phone or what have you, it is still going to be picked up because what is using a cell phone signal to transmit a message. So they're using that. And today it allows prosecutors the opportunity to reconstruct the entire timeline in a minute by minute situation. So it's not one of these cases where they have no idea, or some things are left up to guess, I should say. They're bringing in experts to say, well, what would your opinion be if you saw this? Well, now it's cemented because they're able to prove this. Jurors actually tend to trust digital evidence because they see it as objective. I told you all about that a little bit ago. But defense attorneys are fighting back in several ways. They're questioning witness credibility when it comes to the entering of this type of evidence, gang labeling, because what is really a gang? Is it just because you rap or you carry a weapon? Does that mean you are part of a gang? Whether online beef actually proves conspiracy, because anybody can type anything. And let's be clear, y'all, anybody can have your phone at any time or your social media handles or what have you, your sign-ons, and be posting things that you may or may not know about. Now, it's a little reckless, but these are just some of the things the defense is pointing out. And whether the state can actually prove who fired the fatal shots. Because with that many defendants, and there's like a few of them in here, and riddled with bullets, I personally believe everyone's culpable. If you fire one, you fire 20. They're all one and the same. But this matters legally. My opinion does not matter on this because under Florida conspiracy and accomplice liability law, which I kind of explained it to you all a little bit ago, prosecutors do not even have to prove every single defendant pulled the trigger. If they prove participation in the coordinated felony plan, and that's any felony plan in the state of Florida, liability can still attach. Now, it's interesting that I use the word liability and not culpability. Liability means, say, for instance, these guys were to skedaddle on this criminal offense. The family, the estate of Julio Fulio could still civilly bring a claim against them for being liable for his death. Now, another reason this case exploded online is because the trial reflects a larger national conversation about drill rap culture and social media violence. This is a growing concern amongst criminologists and prosecutors that online taunting escalates real-world retaliatory violence. Rappers now live stream disputes in real time. We've seen it. And opposing groups monitor each other constantly. And prosecutors are increasingly using rap lyrics and social media activity as evidence of motive and intent. Now, I remember Meek Mill up in the Philadelphia area had this whole thing, and a lot of New Yorkers got on this, that they did not want to be able to allow any rap lyrics that a person would rap or what have you to be used against them in a court of law, because they felt like it was an amendment violation under the Constitution and freedom of speech and the First Amendment. But in this situation, when there's a correlation that is so similar to the events that have transpired, as well as the lyrics, it's very hard to overlook the similarity. We see the case of Lil Durk right now that has been detained for several months now because of some of his lyrics, even though it was said that they came out after the fact. The songs were released after the fact. That's the key. They were released after the fact, but when were they written? Or they were released before the fact. When were they written? Was this something that was planned? Prosecutions teams everywhere are looking into this. And it also raises these constitutional concerns that I told you guys about, because defense attorneys nationwide are saying that these are artistic expressions under the Constitution, and they're not specific admissions of guilt. This battle is becoming one of the biggest First Amendment criminal law issues in America as this rap culture grows bigger and bigger and drill rap becomes more prominent. The Fulio case actually sits right in the center of this debate, because this is one of the second cases that we've seen, other than the YSL case, that has brought rap music to the forefront of being admissible and permissible as to whether or not it is admissions of guilt for a defendant. Coverage from law and crime trials and court TV has pulled huge audiences this week because viewers are looking at this gang violence. They're seeing the actual surveillance footage and witness testimony, text messages, and courtroom strategy unfold in real time. And for prosecutors nationwide, this trial may become a blueprint for future digital conspiracy homicide prosecutions. I'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to the second half of the Legal Score. Happy Saturday to everyone. Hope you all are doing well. All right, so let's get into the second half. This is huge throughout our country. Just when I think that we have already dealt with enough separation, lo and behold, there's more redistricting, racial gerrymandering, and early voting chaos. Now, I talked about this a little bit on my last show, but this has really, really gotten out of hand. This is happening in our country right now, and it's not getting enough of mainstream attention, but it's starting to pick up. It should most definitely, because what's happening right now could reshape Congress for years. Across multiple states, lawmakers are aggressively redrawing voting maps following recent Supreme Court decisions weakening parts of the Voting Rights Act. Critics argue minority voting power is being diluted. Supporters argue that states are simply exercising lawful redistricting authority. But let's explain this clearly. Every state redraws congressional districts after the census. But before I get there, let me give you all a definition so you'll know what gerrymandering is. So, for instance, it's done to help a political party. It's a type of partisan between parties, but it's the practice of drawing voting district boundaries in a way that gives an unfair political advantage to a particular party, racial group, or political interest. Gerrymandering comes from 1812 Massachusetts district map approved by Governor Elbridge Gerry that looked like a salamander, leading critics to combine Gerry and salamander into gerrymander. States redraw congressional and legislative districts after each census, which is when everyone is counted. The problem happens when the party in power manipulates those lines strategically instead of drawing fair or geographically logical districts. There's two ways of gerrymandering that are occurring. There's packing, which is concentrating a group's voters into a small number of districts so that their influence is limited elsewhere in the bigger picture. For example, putting most Black voters or Democratic voters into one district so surrounding districts become easier for Republicans to win is a big example. The second one is cracking, splitting a voting group across several districts so that they never form a majority anywhere. An example of that is dividing an urban Black community into multiple suburban heavy districts to weaken its voting power. Now, I told you all that this is done to help a political party. If Republicans draw maps to help Republicans win more seats, or if Democrats are doing the same thing for their particular party. It's done in a way that it's a dominant factor in drawing districts. This can actually be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment or the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Courts are closely scrutinizing racial gerrymandering because it can dilute minority voting strength. Gerrymandering can reduce competitive elections, allow politicians to choose their own voters, weaken minority representation, make elections less responsive to public opinion, and entrench political power for years. An example of that is a party could receive only 50% of statewide votes, but end up controlling 70% of the legislative seats because district lines were strategically drawn. Now, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled differently on partisan versus racial gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is in an epic case of Rucho v. Common Cause in 2019. The court actually said that federal courts generally cannot decide partisan gerrymandering disputes because they are political questions. Racial gerrymandering still unconstitutional if race is the predominant reason that districts were drawn without sufficient legal justification. Current states like Alabama, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Texas are often focusing on whether maps dilute Black voting power. This is a very key thing, especially in the South. It's just one of those things. The South is always highly affected when it's things like this that occur. And I'll tell you about one jurisdiction here shortly that really took drastic measures. Now, I early voted a couple of weeks ago. And some people are even trying to intervene in that. Right now, civil rights groups are arguing that the maps are intentionally weakening Black voting power. One of the biggest developments happened in Virginia. Excuse me, the U.S. Supreme Court this week rejected an attempt by Virginia Democrats to restore a voter-approved congressional map. Why was that map controversial? Because opponents argued that the approval process happened too close to active election procedures and early voting timelines. And this is the part people need to really understand. Election law is obsessed with timing. Courts become extremely reluctant after an election has started, like with rules, once the voting processes begin. That's called the Pearson principle. Judges do not like voter confusion. It is a big fear of theirs. So once early voting begins or ballots are finalized, courts often freeze things in place. In Virginia, Republicans argued the process violated state constitutional procedures because implementation came too late in the cycle, and the Virginia Supreme Court agreed. Then the U.S. Supreme Court refused to intervene. Now, nationally, this is becoming explosive because southern states are rapidly reconsidering district maps after recent Supreme Court rulings narrowed protections under Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act. Civil rights advocates say Black majority districts are increasingly under threat. Republicans are arguing that many existing districts were themselves unconstitutional racial gerrymanders. So they are saying that's the reason they're doing this. And this is why there's legal tension. When does race-based districting become unlawful versus when does removing race considerations dilute minority voting strength? Those two constitutional principles are now colliding head-on. States that are under major scrutiny right now are Alabama, Louisiana, which is where this all kicked off in their Supreme Court, South Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Florida, and I dare add Georgia to that list. Tennessee has already faced criticism in this regard over splitting a Memphis district in ways critics say weakened Democratic and Black voted influence. South Carolina's redistricting fights are now threatening the congressional future of longtime Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn. Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson has openly warned that the Supreme Court's recent rulings could revive Jim Crow-style vote dilution tactics. I'm going to stop and say that again. Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson has openly warned that the Supreme Court's recent rulings could revive Jim Crow-style vote dilution tactics. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp has stated that Georgia will not redraw districts before the 2026 midterms, but changes may come by 2028. So he's inserted my state into the mix, but he is not disrupting anything as of now. It will be interesting to see how this pans out in a couple of years when the primaries and the midterms come up for 2028. Here's the political reality that nobody wants to say out loud. Both parties, for real, can gerrymander when they can. Republicans do it, and so do Democrats. No one is exempt on this. The difference is the states that they control. Now, from a constitutional law perspective, the Supreme Court has increasingly said that partisan gerrymandering is often a political question beyond federal court intervention. So, who's controlling it? Racial gerrymandering remains legally actionable, but that's the only distinction. But that distinction is critical. So states now carefully frame maps as partisan rather than racial so that they don't get the intervention from the federal courts. They're keeping it amongst themselves. Litigation actually revolves around proving the intent of these redistricting. Like the intent is a big thing. You'll see that in the law. Intent is a lot. Intent is in tort law, criminal law. You know, the intent, the mind. What is your purpose? Was this map partisan or racially discriminatory? That's the billion-dollar legal question here. This fight will dominate the election law for years. Like this just started something huge. So we'll keep an eye open for that. Before I go into the next segment, last night on Friday with the fellas, I told you all that I would look up the Sean Payton record against the Carolina Panthers, because Jay Train and myself and B. Striller were on, and we were talking about the strength of the schedules, you know, our prediction for the season, for the NFL season. And I basically said we own Sean Payton. You know, we own him from when he was with the Saints, because this year he's going to be, continuing to coach the Denver Broncos, and he's going to be coming to Carolina, where the Broncos will take on the Panthers. And we just have, a bad taste in our mouth since Super Bowl 50. But just to be true to my word, Sean Payton has an 18-13 regular season record against the Carolina Panthers from his years of coaching with the Saints. He's actually 19-13 overall, with one of those wins coming in the playoffs back in 2017 when they advanced in the NFC wildcard game. So he's one of the coaches the Panthers have faced the most because of his long NFC South rivalry. So he was in the South for quite a bit. And I promised you all I would give y'all those stats, and there they are. So I'm a person of my word. We still own them. I don't care what the record says. All right, moving on. Segment 3 of our show today. And I found this out last night, y'all. This was crazy. One of the wildest corruption stories developing this week in Knox County, Tennessee. That's Knoxville, to you all who may not know. At least 11 current and former employees tied to the Knox County Sheriff's Office have been indicted by the feds, guys. According to investigators, this wasn't a minor misconduct issue. They have been indicted on theft, conspiracy, fraud, misuse of services, and corruption tied to their narcotics division. Now, I'm going to go back and revisionist history for a moment. Back in the 2006 time frame in North Carolina, the Robertson County Sheriff's Department, which happens to be my home area because I'm originally from North Carolina, those of you who know, they had a similar situation with Operation Tarnish Badge, which involved law enforcement that were basically taking money from drug dealers and you name it. It starts from there and goes forward. You guys can look it up. Operation Tarnish Badge. They had everything from stolen. Back in the day, they used to use the cards, like the SIM cards for your phone, but they use them for like Dish and Direct TV. They were selling those. They were, doing everything back in the Robertson County area. But that thing made national national because it went beyond the borders of North Carolina, even up into Virginia. And there were several defendants of not only sheriff deputies, but those that were closely affiliated with them as well. So this immediately reminded me of that. But anyway, among those indicted out of Knox County, Captain Aaron Yarnell, former narcotics detectives, sergeants, and supervisory personnel. Investigators say the scheme stretches back years, predating the current sheriff's administration. So they be looking at these guys for a while. That's why it's so hard on federal crimes to beat them, because they don't just jump in as soon as they see something. They plot, they wait, they gather their evidence, and they build their cases. According to reports, several defendants face conspiracy to commit theft over $250,000, theft of services, and related fraud allegations. But this is why this is going to matter nationally for you all. Public trust in law enforcement is already fragile. I mean, it has remained fragile from aggressive policing. It's racial tensions in police, and community. And now you have this. When corruption allegations emerge inside narcotics units specifically, it becomes even more serious because narcotics divisions often have confidential informants. They seize money and property of defendants or alleged defendants, and they manage surveillance operations, and they interact with organized criminal networks. So this is a huge breach of trust in this organization. This is an enormous opportunity for abuse if any hint of oversight fails in these agencies. Historically, narcotics corruption cases have included falsified overtime. I mean, yeah, you get it. You say you're out there on the beat, but you're at home sleep. You're not working that case. Asset seizure abuse. You're taking everybody's assets for your own personal use. Stuff that's not even affiliated to the case. Evidence tampering, like taking a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It could be money from the bust itself. Kickback schemes, I already explained that, and misuse of confidential funds. Now, we don't yet know the full extent of what prosecutors believe happened here. Like, what was the triggering moment for this entire implosion within this department? But grand jury indictments involving this many personnel suggest that investigators believe the conduct was systemic rather than isolated, which means I'm not in this by myself. I've got like so many people. And not only that, every person you bring in, they're making sure they're not going to tell, because if they tell, then they're also now part of this huge conspiracy. They've made themselves part of it. And so there's no wiggle room for them. And that's what makes this case extremely explosive. The sheriff's office has already placed several employees on leave pending proceedings. And I told you all, some of these employers are previous employers. And this story is going to get bigger as time goes by. This just occurred within the last couple of days. But once internal corruption investigations begin, prosecutors often start reviewing old convictions and prior narcotic operations. So there may be some defendants right now that are in custody. Get ready for their cases to be reviewed, if not overturned, because of internal breach. Their credibility definitely could possibly collapse here, and the entire prosecution can unravel. So this is a domino effect, and this could become a massive post-conviction issue in Tennessee courts. As I get ready to wrap up here, I know I talked about a lot today. And if you're watching this on a replay, feel free to still drop a comment. We go back and we check and see what people are saying. I told you at the beginning of the podcast that this is Mental Health Awareness Month. Excuse me, Mental Health Awareness Month. And a lot of people, public figures, what have you, we've seen the pressure and public collapse. But not only from a public perspective, a lot of us are going through a lot of things. This is a very tough economy. We are seeing gas upwards of $5 in some states, and it's not going to get any better. We're seeing a shortage of benefits for food and lodging for families. And we're seeing the same veterans that have sacrificed overseas come back and they are not receiving the resources that they need. And therefore, they're on the street, destitute, what have you, when they've done such a big risk for this country. Mental health is so big behind politicians, lawyers, officers, rappers, judges, public figures, just human beings as a whole. And over the past month, we've seen multiple tragedies involving suicide, addiction, violence, and emotional collapse. One of the most shocking stories involved former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. You all remember him. He killed his estranged wife. They were supposed to be getting their divorce finalized that same week, Serena Fairfax. And then he took his own life in what police described as a murder-suicide. Reports indicate that the couple was involved in a contentious divorce. Their children were home during the incident, and they were the ones that found their parents and called 911. And this case actually stunned a lot of the community in Fairfax because he was once considered a rising political star. But of course, he had the SA allegations from years earlier and attempts on public destruction of his reputation. But public scandal, political isolation, legal battles, financial stress, and personal collapse can create devastating psychological pressure, not just on public figures, but also on us as a whole. And that's something society still struggles to discuss, honestly. We're watching more and more public figures implode under relentless online criticism, even from an aspect of, the filters and things of, all the AI generated stuff of trying to make a person look better in their opinion. It's like a facade of you're not good enough. Political warfare that we're seeing, addiction, financial pressures, public humiliations, and untreated mental illnesses are dominating our culture. And in recent months, there have been suspected high-profile deaths involving some athletes with suspected overdoses, other athletes with self-inflicted gun violence, and mental health crises. We're living in an era where people are more publicly connected than ever, yet emotionally isolated at the same time. I always remember hearing growing up, you could be in a room full of people and still be alone. There's another layer to this. Social media has fundamentally changed shame. Years ago, a person's crises would stay local, but now millions of people get a chance to watch this crisis play out in real time. Failures become viral, humiliation becomes permanent, because even though you go back and delete this from your timeline, it's still out there, and the public judgment and scrutiny never stops. And for people who are already struggling mentally, that could become psychologically catastrophic. Now, let me say this clear. Mental health treatment is not weakness at all. Therapy is not weakness. Medication is not weakness. Crisis intervention is not weakness. And especially in professions like law enforcement, law, politics, military, and entertainment. Those are often toxic cultures around emotional suppression because those people have to show up for everybody else and put on this facade like everything is fine because their image is who they are. And any crack of weakness or vulnerability could ruin who they are to the public. People are expected to push through in those positions until they actually break. And many never ask for help because they fear embarrassment, career damage, judgment, or just appearing unstable. We've put a stigma on that where it's weak if you're saying things like that. If you're admitting that, hey, I'm having a moment, I'm not happy, this, that, and the third, you're looked at as judged. And by whose standards, though? We're all human. And even the person doing the judging, they're having their own issues. They're just not honest and open about it. We have to do better as a society at separating accountability from dehumanization. People should absolutely be held accountable for crimes, but we also need systems that recognize psychological deterioration before tragedy happens and others are involved. Because many of these stories that we're thinking about and we've talked about and we've read about have actually had warning signs long before the final collapse, and they were just missed. So, in closing, we've talked about the Julio Fulio murder trial. You all will want to check that out. And even though the name sounds, a little ridiculous, the case itself is very thought-provoking. Not from necessarily like an interest of the crime itself that occurred, but just from some of the legal implications that I've laid out about that specific trial, the digital evidence and gang conspiracy, and what prosecutors can use in presenting those cases. And then to talk about the gerrymandering, the national constitutional battle over redistricting and racial voting power. Those are all big, major things that are not to be glossed over. And then this now Knox County sheriff corruption scandal that I'm sure has rocked that community to the core. Knoxville is pretty close-knit, just in the mountain area of Tennessee. And I can imagine with 11 deputies being indicted, that is huge. And those are just the ones they have that are indicted. With that many people, I'm pretty sure there are way more that are culpable that for some reason or another, they have not been indicted as of yet, or the prosecutor has declined to indict them. The devastating mental health crisis that is affecting us nationwide. It's never too late for help. Even today, if you're listening to this and you've contemplated talking to a professional, please talk to a professional. They are bound to hold everything in that you tell them by doctor-patient privilege, as long as you're not speaking about harming someone else or yourself. They have a right then to get involved. But it's so many numbers out there that are offering help. So please make sure that you get help. And if there's one thing that connects all of this, is pressure. Pressure inside politics, pressure inside law enforcement, pressure inside the fame, pressure inside online culture, and pressure inside the justice system itself. And pressure without accountability becomes corruption. But pressure without support becomes tragedy. I hope you all will stay informed, stay critical, and take care of yourselves and the people around you. I will see you all next episode. Please make sure you join us tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. before you go to church for the Sunday morning Big Sports Show with Keith Engel, Jack Hirsch, James Martin, Brian Arndt, and surprise guest. That's tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And shows throughout. BW Flicks is your movie happy place where you get your movie reviews. Nice, fun show. And all other podcasters and sports throughout 24/7. You all have a great day and good night.